What happens when a single silent man forces an entire justice machine to expose its own corruption? Tonight, you'll witness the secret experiment that turned mockery into a national reckoning. Do you demand these conspiracies be dragged into the light? Then drop a 1 in the comments and subscribe for the next chapter in the battle for justice. It was an autumn Wednesday that crept in quietly like an old friend, arriving late into a small courthouse in rural Arborville. The walls, yellowed with age, carried the musty scent of damp paper, and the air still tasted of yesterday's cold coffee. At the back of the bench, two broad-shouldered security officers quietly ushered in a tall, composed black man. He wore no handcuffs, but their steady grip on his arms spoke volumes. His crisp white shirt, a comforting reminder of better days, bore the faint shadow of a dried bloodstain at the collar, an unwelcome souvenir from a night that would not be forgotten. The judge, a familiar face to many in the room, shuffled in with the slow deliberateness of a man used to long hours and heavy responsibilities. He settled his robe, flipped through a file that to the eyes of everyone present seemed as bare as a winter branch, and then leaned forward to tap the microphone. His voice, though measured, carried the weight of authority as he announced in soft but firm tones, "This trial is now in session." From the front row, a small voice belonging to a boy of no more than 6 drifted upward like a sparrow's song. "Is he a bad guy, Mama?" The child's innocent question landed in the silent room, and for a moment hearts paused. Then, like the ripples on a still pond, nervous snickers spread among the spectators. A young officer, barely out of his 20s, called out with a sharp edge, "If you can't see the problem right in front of you, you might need your eyes checked." His laughter, harsh and jarring, bounced off the walls. Through it all, the man remained utterly still. No lawyer stood by his side. No family member wept in the gallery. No outburst of protest broke the tense hush. Instead, his steady gaze held the empty judge's bench, silent, unwavering, and powerful in its quiet dignity. In that moment, his silence spoke louder than any roar, and in the hush that followed, every person in that room felt the first stirrings of a trial that would test more than just the letter of the law. The judge shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and addressed the man directly. "State your name for the record." Silence stretched like a taut wire. A murmured exchange with the court clerk revealed there was no name on file. "And you will be representing yourself?" the judge asked more softly this time. The man inclined his head in a deliberate nod. "Do you wish to make any statement before the charges are read?" Again, that 5-second gaze, steady, unblinking, met the judge's eyes as if issuing an unspoken challenge. No words followed. A hush fell over the gallery, more chilling than any outburst of anger. Chairs creaked under restless shifts, and somewhere in the back, a court officer's phone camera blinked to life. The clerk, flipping through the thin stack of documents, frowned at the absence of any address, occupation, or prior record. The judge lifted his pen, cleared his throat once more, and attempted to restore decorum, but the rhythm of uncertainty pulsed like a staccato heartbeat throughout the room. Mockery began as nervous snickers blossoming quickly into cruel barbs about clown and drifter. A lawyer in the back row smirked as he whispered to a colleague, "No one to defend him, guess that's his big performance." Laughter rippled through the seats, echoing off the worn wood paneling. Yet the man remained unmoved, every jeer and jibe striking him like a dagger twisting in the thin veneer of justice. In his silence lay a power more formidable than any raised voice, a stillness that forced the court to confront its own prejudices, one cruel word at a time. Before long, the jeers swelled into a tidal wave of derision. An officer stepped forward and played a grainy body cam clip of a rough roadside arrest. "Officer Bast." "He's resisting," the officer barked over and over, the phrase echoing like a broken record. When the screen glitched into corrupted frames stamped "Error 419," laughter rippled through the courtroom, mocking the very idea that the system might fail. A clerk muttered under her breath, "Corrupted just means edited," earning a fresh round of snickers. Phones appeared in every hand, TikTok filters queued up parody tracks at the ready. "This morning's black show," someone jeered, and the room shook with cruel amusement. Amid the uproar, the man remained statuesque, no flinch, no blink, no sign that he heard the taunts. His poker face stare mirrored every vicious barb back to its source, as though exposing each watcher's own savagery. A circle of tech-savvy spectators passed their screens around, enjoying cinematic slow-motion slapstick sound effects and outrageous captions. A young law student in the back row even shouted, "Who invited the clown to court?" and more laughter crashed down like a carnival riff. In that raucous soundscape, genuine justice lay drowned beneath a tide of contempt and mockery. Yet in the middle of this circus, his unbroken silence spoke louder than any defense. The hush it demanded was heavier than any gavel strike, a clear reminder that despite every attempt to reduce him to spectacle, his dignity remained intact. And in that profound stillness, one thought flickered through the minds of those who laughed the hardest. Perhaps real power doesn't come from shouting down others, but from refusing to play along. Just as the courtroom felt like a theater of cruelty, the front door swung open, and in a flash, a dark-tinted armored SUV rolled to a silent stop outside. Two plainclothes agents stepped from its rear doors with measured calm, their presence somehow deeper than any uniform. Without exchanging pleasantries, they approached the local officers and produced sleek, strategic command credentials. The senior agent's voice cut through the crowd. "Release him." In that instant, the room's temperature seemed to drop. The local officers froze in place as though struck by a higher order. One by one, they snapped off their radios, removed holsters, and laid sidearms on the hood of the SUV itself, an unspoken confession that their authority had met its match. Spectators held their breath. Some phones continued to record, casting cold light on faces that only moments before had been alive with derision. The murmurs died away into a vacuum of disbelief, as if everyone suddenly realized they were witnessing something they could never unsee. The plainclothes agents gently guided the still silent man to the vehicle. He walked with the same dignified calm as he had entered, his posture unbowed by ridicule or threat. As he reached the open door, he paused, bent to retrieve a scratched military badge from the floorboard, and slipped it into his pocket with a steady hand. There was no nod of thanks, no handshake, no fanfare, only the quiet assertion of a man who knew his own worth. A few soft gasps traced the edges of that moment, then evaporated into a profound hush, the kind of silence that follows an unseen power more commanding than any bullet, more convincing than any shout. By midday, nothing remained hidden. The courtroom video had spread across news sites, social media feeds, and even late-night talk shows. Within hours, the Department of Justice sent an urgent processing memorandum to Chief Pendleton of Monroe County. That afternoon, Pendleton summoned every mid-level commander to a windowless conference room, blinds drawn tight against prying eyes. The air was thick with tension and the faint hum of a rattling projector. When the commanders arrived, Pendleton's gaunt face appeared on a wall screen lit by the glow of flashing patrol car lights and the dark bulk of an armored SUV. He pressed a button. Surveillance footage flickered into view, two local cruisers blocking the road officers, stepping from their vehicles to confront the silent man. No cuffs, no explanation. Then the armored SUV intervened. Pendleton's voice boomed through the silent room. Who ordered this level of force without cause? For a long moment, only the projector whirred. No one met his gaze. Then from the back corner, a trembling whisper. "We just saw a different color." The words hung in the stale air like an accusation. Pendleton stepped forward and placed a photograph on the table, the man's dented military badge. Its silver edge scratched the emblem visible beneath the bloodstain. It lay there, undeniable evidence of a crime committed in broad daylight. A collective shiver passed through the room as recognition dawned. This was not a simple traffic stop gone wrong, but the raw shape of systemic prejudice, an institutional offense steeply embedded that it had masqueraded as routine procedure. Eyes shifted from badge to badge, from uniform to uniform, as each officer confronted the reality they had long avoided. The meeting ended without applause, without discharge orders, but with a must-act resolve. Outside, the humid Arborville air pressed against the courthouse walls, carrying the first rumble of a justice system poised at the brink of change. 3 days later, on a clear spring morning in Savannah, Sergeant Oscar Dale and Officer Riley Moore stood before the United States District Court for the Southern District of Arborville. Quiet settled over the packed gallery as the indictment, nearly 50 pages long, was read aloud. Dale and Moore faced a litany of charges: organized abuse of authority, public humiliation of a senior officer, unlawful use of force, and interference with Class 0 communications. For the first time in memory, local lawmen were accused at the federal level of deploying their badges as weapons. Live cameras captured every moment. Grainy CCTV footage showed the pair approaching the defendant's vehicle without warning. Military phone recordings labeled Code Black Sierra Zero crackled through the courtroom speakers, revealing radio calls that described a supposedly dangerous black man who in fact had obeyed every command. Viewers heard officers joke about his silence, even as they called for backup. Each clip laid bare a pattern of prejudice and power abused. During the two-day trial, testimony came from shaken bystanders, fellow officers, and one young clerk who had suspected something was wrong when she saw no arrest report filed. The prosecution presented email chains and dispatch logs that contradicted routine procedure. Defense counsel offered no justification beyond following orders, a plea that rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence. The jury retired just before lunch. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. There would be no sentencing delay. In open court, the judge pronounced their dismissal from the force, stripped them of rank, and ordered their immediate removal. The stunned officers exchanged pale glances as deputies escorted them from the room. Outside the courthouse, reporters called it a watershed moment. Never before had such a clear, unflinching account of high-level racial bias within law enforcement been tried and resolved in public view without procedural delay. That same afternoon, conversations began in precincts from Augusta to Macon about the meaning of accountability. It was, as one editorial later put it, a landmark verdict that would echo through every corner of the justice system. In the weeks that followed, the ripples of that silent stand spread far beyond Monroe County. More than 200 wrongfully detained men and women filed class action lawsuits from Savannah to St. Louis, each case a testament to lives interrupted by unchecked prejudice. State legislatures in California, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Oregon moved swiftly to establish independent review boards charged with re-examining police violence cases predating the year 2000. Their aim was to shine a clear light on past injustices and offer long overdue redress. Meanwhile, Capitol Hill buzzed with urgency. Bipartisan congressional hearings convened in the hallowed halls of the House Judiciary Committee to scrutinize reasonable suspicion, the legal doctrine long blamed for enabling stops and searches driven by bias instead of evidence. Lawmakers heard testimony from civil rights advocates, veteran officers, and scholars alike, all calling for reforms that would demand documented, articulable grounds for every detention, no more vague hunches left unrecorded. Proposals on the table included transparent oversight panels, mandatory body camera protocols, with unedited upload requirements, and an appeals process even for those held briefly. Back at the National Police Academy in Quantico, instructors scrambled to integrate a new Sterling scenario into ethics training. In this immersive exercise, recruits would experience firsthand the psychological pressure of being stopped without cause, learning how split-second judgments can reinforce deeply ingrained biases. Academy officials described it as the single most important lesson we've added in decades. By early summer, conversations in precinct break rooms and city council meetings alike carried a new tone. Accountability was no longer a distant ideal, but an imminent expectation. One retired chief told his old colleagues, "We've crossed a line where silence is no longer an option." As legislative drafts took shape and training curricula shifted, it became clear that the legacy of one man's unwavering quiet would outlast any courtroom verdict, heralding a new era where the balance of justice might finally begin to tilt toward fairness. At the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, the so-called Sterling effect has become required reading. Cadets pore over transcripts of that courtroom morning, learning how one man's silence forced an entire system to reckon with its own biases. Ethics instructors now pose a simple question. When you encounter someone who does not threaten you, will you stop and really examine your assumptions? Rather than replaying the story from the officer's perspective, cadets rewrite the scene through the eyes of the silent black man confronting the fear and confusion he must have felt. Across the country, police training academies have adopted similar exercises. In urban simulation labs, recruits unarmed and uninformed are detained without an explanation, while biometric sensors quietly track heart rate, perspiration, and stress levels. Within minutes, more than 80% of participants show peak anxiety matching the panic real victims describe. These data are shared openly in debriefings, replacing lectures on procedure with conversations about empathy and the human toll of unchecked authority. In city council chambers and sheriff's offices alike, veteran officers admit these drills are eye-opening. One captain confessed, "I thought I was steady under fire until I felt that helplessness myself." Another training director observed that tactics without understanding just reinforce old habits. Now, academy curricula emphasize emotional intelligence as much as marksmanship. Instructors teach officers to recognize subtle signs of fear in a stranger's eyes and to ask, am I acting on fact or prejudice? By embedding the Sterling scenario into every level of leadership courses from sergeant's promotion boards to chief's retreats, the profession strives to make empathy inseparable from authority. What began as a single motionless stand in a small courtroom has blossomed into a national movement, a promise that those sworn to protect will first learn to protect their own conscience. In the months that followed, courage took many forms. In cities from Phoenix to Houston, a wave of police chiefs, captains, and commanders quietly penned resignation letters, and in their hearts whispered, I upheld silence over justice for too long. Across precincts, public access portals, once clogged with obfuscated training reports, were swept clean. Now, every citizen could read every complaint, every internal review, every line of disciplinary action. At the Pentagon, officials released the full encrypted transcript of that morning's radio call. General Sterling is being unlawfully restrained. Activate priority federal response. The simple words underscored a single truth. Even the highest ranks are not above the law. Meanwhile, Colonel Raymond Huxley, the officer who had fueled rumors and shared doctored clips, found himself facing a court-martial for disseminating false information and violating the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Within law enforcement agencies, the eye of oversight turned inward. Automated systems scanned internal chat logs, social media channels, and shared memes flagging any taunt or caricature that echoed courtroom mockery. In a quiet office in Tallahassee, an algorithm highlighted a derogatory post sent by an officer with 20 years on the force, and that officer was summoned for mandatory bias counseling. Funding followed transparency. Major donors and community partners withdrew support from agencies that failed to comply with open records mandates. Grants were tied to proof of unbiased policing. Budgets for body cam and dashboard cam uploads doubled, ensuring every stop, every question, every page of every report was instantly public. In this new era, silence was no longer a default. It was a choice, one that could cost careers and reputations. And for the growing number of officers who pledged, I will speak up, it meant a promise to put justice above protocol, humanity above habit, and truth above fear. The hush that once shielded wrongdoing had been replaced by a steadfast resolve. Transparency is not optional. It is the cornerstone of integrity. In a quiet corner of the Civil Rights Justice Museum, a solitary glass case holds that dented, scratched badge. No grand statue, no lengthy inscription, only a small plaque that reads, "Where justice was broken and restored by one who did not shout." Visitors of all ages pause before its schoolchildren, clustering in hushed groups, college students tracing its worn edges with their eyes, police recruits removing their caps in respectful stillness. Soft footsteps and whispered questions fill the air. If his silence could speak, why must we raise our voices? Across the country, training academies have adopted a ritual. Each new class begins with a moment of silence at that very display. No speeches, no presentations, just collective reflection on what it means to stand firm when wrongs go unchallenged. In lecture halls and classrooms, professors write a single sentence on the whiteboard and leave it unadorned. Justice is not proclaimed, it is revealed. That line has become more than a motto, it's a guidepost. In law schools, budding attorneys discuss not only the letter of the law, but the weight of compassion. In police academies, cadets learn that empathy can be as vital as an arrest procedure. Communities commemorate this quiet legacy each autumn on Sterling Day, when towns host silent marches. Residents walk side by side unbroken for 10 minutes in respectful stillness before gathering to share stories of standing up, speaking out, or simply listening. In federal training centers, senior officers mentor rookies. If you see someone who poses no threat, will you pause and question your assumptions? Decades from that fateful trial, the dented badge remains a powerful symbol, not of victory, but of awakening. It reminds us that genuine justice often arrives not in loud declarations or grand gestures, but in the patient refusal to be silenced. And so the general who never raised his voice continues to teach a nation that the quietest act of courage can reveal the deepest truths. From this story, we learn that sometimes the greatest strength does not lie in loud words, but in steadfast silence that forces a system to look at itself. The message reminds us that when confronted with prejudice, outright opposition can only inflame tensions, while a calm, unwavering stance creates the space for self-examination. If I were the main character, I would carry on by documenting these experiences, sharing them with communities, and advocating for concrete reforms in police training and civic education. I would encourage everyone to attend implicit bias workshops, support victims of injustice, and push for transparent oversight laws. Will racism be entirely eliminated by 2050? Although legal and educational advances may reduce its impact, history shows that dismantling deeply rooted bias is a long, challenging process. That is why every step we take today, however small, is invaluable in moving toward a fairer society in the decades ahead. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. All characters and events are creations of the author and are not intended to reference or criticize any real person. It is designed to raise awareness of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating one another with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose all forms of violence, prejudice, and injustice. Please consider this before viewing.